Hello everyone. I am so sorry. I literally wanted to upload Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays video on Wednesday initially, but unfortunately the volume was giving me issues, so I had to delay all of this week's videos up until now, but we should all be caught up by the end of today. So without further ado, let me address what I wanted to talk about for this book review, and that is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And this book in particular focuses on the era of the 1950s and of a African American that is going through this whole, I guess, era and following various events that occur within his life. In particular, it is also emphasized that he is fairly young, at least in the beginning of the book, since he is at university initially. And then, at one point in the book, he moves to the north, because the university is in the south, and so he moves north to find work. And that ends up being a lot more complicated than initially anticipated. You see various different scenarios that end up taking place, and he ultimately kind of comes to the conclusion that it's fairly difficult to trust people, and he oftentimes felt, at least as he was going on his journey within this book, that he felt people were trying to use them for their own selfish ends, rather than seeing him as an actual individual. And hence he sort of gives the title Invisible Man to himself, because nobody really ultimately sees him for who he is, or really appreciates what he has to offer. And so you end up having various characters that he ends up encountering, and you sort of see how he comes to sort of this conclusion. What I do like about this book, in particular, books that focus more on this kind of stuff that we've, I think, seen in American literature time and time again, is the fact that it tries to go beyond the racial elements. It tries to present a more in-depth and complex perspective, and instead also provides a more look at the individual. Because initially when a lot of these books present themselves, they often try to paint sort of, villains and heroes and, people who are doing the right thing and people who are doing the wrong thing. But here, it's just mostly this one guy kind of going through this particular period, and in doing so kind of creates his own identity. And tries to go beyond, I think, the whole racial elements that were kind of really ingrained into people's minds, at least during that period, hence why it was made during this period, and why it sold so many copies. And apparently it sold so many that Ralph Ellison really didn't make anything else that was as popular after that. So this book did really have a significant influence, and I think a lot of people were sort of going through that stage probably within that time period of, looking beyond, looking at people sort of beyond their identity or what they're associated as, and seeing them as just people. So that's kind of what I think largely, primarily, what, at least from what I can tell, the author Ralph was trying to get across to the audience more so. Then I think the whole concept of really race or race relations, even though they're present and they're sort of driving force to the book, it tries to go beyond that, and in doing so provide commentary onto people trying to see themselves more than what is presented to the world, I guess you could say. So again, and I think it just kind of goes to show, I think that morally, I think we should look not at what somebody is, but who they are as a person. What are their morals, what are their ethics, what do they believe in, what do they want to strive for in life, all of those kinds of things I think are a lot more important than largely what the person chooses to, I guess, identify themselves as. And again, instead of focusing on identifying the self under those conditions, you go beyond that. And I think this is really what this is really the huge concept of this book. It's going beyond what you are and exploring more of your inner self and what thoughts, ideas, and morals you have. So I think that's really the essence of the story, and I think ultimately was probably the dominant perspective, I think, of people during the time. I think most people were of the idea that we shouldn't judge people based upon, you know, what they are, but who they are. And I think that's really what's really the emphasis that at least um, the author tries to get across, because it's not so much about what place you're sort of in life, but kind of where you're trying to go. And you can see too that the the person the main character within the story, and again, he's not really given a name. He tries to sort of, again, go beyond that and try to see himself more as a person um, with with a certain identity and individuality, and not just someone to be used for. Um, so again, it doesn't try to side, I think, with one end of the spectrum that at least was going on within that period, because you probably had fairly extremes on either side, trying to kind of vouch for sort of some kind of power and say. And again, I think what the author does brilliantly is not side with one particular end of this spectrum that at least was going on during the time. At least when it comes to these sort of, I guess, racial relations, he takes the position of, I'm going to go and do my own thing, and I'm not going to let these extremes bother me. And I think that's really a good message to send to people, um, especially when you look at it through the context of at least what was going on during the time. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this particular book. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.